Okay, so you already heard my topic. So first of all, I wanted to kind of get you a little bit into the context of why I was even interested in that. A couple of years ago, I was working in a publishing house, and there was a series of books, exactly these ones, that got me interested because it's sex educational books, Canadian ones with the name of My Sexual Education. I think the original name is My Sexuality, but it's separated into 3 age groups, and you have the teenager one, the mid one, and from 0 to 6. So what really struck my interest was that this specific book from 0 to 6 was extremely overly underlooked. No one was buying it. There is always left copies of this one, but none of the other ones, which made me think, and actually by observing, I was able to see how the reason why that was first of all because people were disregarding the importance of talking about sex to kids, or thinking of sexual education as only education, talking about romantic sex and penetrative sex. And also whenever parents were actually interested into that literature, their kids usually have passed the age of 6, so that's why they never actually were searching for it. So I got to see how there is a big gap, and I got interested in why there is such a gap in the even definition, and why the definition of sex education is not that clear, and people were connecting it with solely one thing. And also because the name was changed by the publishers themselves to be more palatable for the public, I got to think, is it possible that there is external, or in this case internal, reasons to influence and change a book or a title to make it more palatable? So my main ideas were, first of all, that sex educational books for pre-adolescents are heavily underlooked, as I said. And I think it's very important because the exposure of children to sexual content, it's way earlier right now at this age, at this era. And secondly, that sex education has a political understanding, as it evokes party political conflict over policies and reinforces particular meanings and power relations. So I kind of mentioned my focus and topic, that I'm looking into the lack of diversity and interest in sex educational books. But still, I was very surprised because there is early reinforcement of gender roles when we are talking about children's books. So I was wondering why nobody is talking about sex educational books when really in children's book you still meet a lot of those criteria and roles. I was examining only the case study of Bulgaria in the present, and I wanted to see if I can connect any political action to these effects. So really quickly, that was the objects that I was following was first to see what books were actually proposed on the market, to follow the academia conversation on the topic and the political activities, to see the publisher's point of view, which for me was very important to have the point of view of a very conservative publishing house, a semi-conservative one, and a liberal one, and then to question if sex educational book market is influenced by any certain political parties in Bulgaria or self-censored. So these were my research questions, which, spoiler alert, I'm gonna kinda answer as well. So what were the strategies that some publishers may have to offer more diverse books in sex education? Turns out that publishers use a lot of external opinions from experts to be sure whenever a book is meant to be for kids or for such a delicate matter like that, but that usually is only responsible on their own personal responsibility. How did political, radical, and conservative parties influence popular representation of sexuality in modern Bulgaria. They basically try to make it into a taboo topic that nobody talks about, and to what extent this influence shapes the understanding of the Bulgarian gender public on sex education in books. As I said, my observation led to think that a lot of people were disregarding this as an importance because they were only think about penetrative sex. So my approach was kind of spread into two. So first I had the sex education and gender representation in children's book, and my examples were coming from very weird places, diverse ones like China, Iran, Czech Republic, and France, because specifically on sex education I found a big lack on Bulgarian literature on the topic. And then talking about the understanding of gender in Bulgaria, we have quite well researched in Bulgaria. It's a very well researched topic, as Shaban even also was talking about those things like anti-gender campaigns and politicizing gender. So from one side, talking about the sex education and gender representation, I was trying to find similarities to the Bulgarian context and the examples that I was reading about. And for example, when we were talking about China, one of the most interesting things that got confirmed into my interviews was that metaphors play a massive role when we're talking about communication with kids. That also kind of leads to a presumed sexual innocence that kids have, and that educational books not only facilitate pedagogical purposes, but also draw attention to particular social cultural ideologies representing of topics of sex. When we were talking about, for example, another similarities that I was able to connect were the rise of more conservative approach when we are talking about children's literature in Bulgaria and in France. And also, when I was looking into Czech Republic, I was very surprised to see how similar their struggle is. And in Iran, I was able to prove that books, and specifically picture books, have a really big impact and are a great vessel to manipulate kids from an early age. When we were talking about the understanding of gender in Bulgaria, Shaban actually talked quite a lot about that, so I'm not going to get too much into it, but it's important to know that politicizing gender is very intertwined with the history of a social cultural environment, and also its state's political system. And as I said, Shaban already told you a little bit about the anti-gender campaigns like the Istanbul Convention and the National Child Strategy, which, for example, the Istanbul Convention that made the word gender being a synonym to faggot, for example, very shortly said. My theory was leaning on I was looking into identity control theory, which is the role typology that are defined by gender and how gender is silent across multiple situations, because emotions operate within an internal control system to stabilize gender identity and perpetuate the social structure, in a sense that talks about the very fine differences that, for example, have when books don't represent females as primal protagonists as much as men, for example, and in a sense showing or proving those role models when female characters are not fined that easily as male ones. And my second theory that I was leaning on was feminist theory, and I was looking into one of the most heated debates maybe, and the feminist literacy criticism, which was about fairy tales. And there's two because the whole topic is very dual in its potential. So I was looking into how literature influences and structures ideas of gender from an early age, and the first side of the argument by Alison Durkins is that she strongly claims that both popular classic fairy tales and other lesser known ones often feature female characters representing strong personalities, but at the same time not well acquainted with the very small part of fairy tales that is just extremely popular because it was recreated by Walt Disney, for example. And talking about that specific small group of fairy tales, we can see in literature like Susan Baumiller's, for example, where she shows how female characters are victimized most of the time. But also, or for example, when what Andrea Dworkin says in Woman Hating, that for example, a very active woman will be portrayed as evil, or very passive one will be portrayed as good. And the second idea, the second line of debate is by Bruno Bernheim. Am I pronouncing it right? Who believes that fairy tale describe eternal truth about the predisposition of human psyche, and at the conflict in fairy tales are gender neutral, which I thought was very interesting, because one of my interviews from the most conservative publishing house that I was talking to had exactly the same beliefs, and basically it means that reflective periods of maturation helps with universal human problems to find meaning in life, to kind of deal with the personal limitation, with Oedipal dilemmas, deal with dependence on authority and peer competition, and in the end, above all, find a sense of self-worth and more responsibility, without any, like, doesn't matter if it's a boy or a girl, it has the same meaning. So my hypothesis and the results, to go a little bit back and then answering again, I was hypothesizing that publishing houses practice self-censorship because of the lack of demand for more diverse sex educational books. I did find that that was not true. I rejected that hypothesis because the process of publishing self-educational books for everyone to included a lot of additional effort and specialists, so it was very heavily loaded with personal responsibilities that came from publishing houses, which I think is a double-sided sword, because at the end you can't be always dependent on the personal responsibility of someone, but because I did find a lot of still continuing anti-gendering campaigns against specific books in every publishing house that I was talking to. They had experienced hardships with that. I did prove the next two hypotheses, that there is still homophobic political practices that influence the Bulgarian society, and the concept of sex education has a very limited understanding because of misinformation. So thank you for the attention, and so sorry that I don't have mints. I brought just a jar of condoms, so you can help yourself with those. And also look at the books. There are picture books, so sorry that they are in Bulgarian, but if anyone is interested.